The bowl hit the tile floor with a hollow clatter, rolling just slightly before settling beside my foot. I bent down to reach for it instinctively, like I always have. Knees aching, hands trembling just a bit from the cold. And then I heard her voice, sharp, amused, dismissive. "You have hands, don't you?" She said it like it was a joke, like asking me to pick up the bowl I always pick up was somehow an offense. I froze, crouched there, fingers hovering just above the porcelain rim. Something about the way she said it, so casual, so offhand, cracked something inside me, something that had already been worn thin for years. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She just turned away, wiping her hands on a towel that I had laundered the day before, humming to herself, as if the air between us didn't ache. That bowl wasn't just a bowl. That moment wasn't just a moment. It was the weight of everything. It was every time I said yes when I should have said, "I'm tired." It was every plate I washed, every floor I swept, every back I rubbed while my own bones screamed for rest. It was 15 years of caring for a woman who never once said thank you, not even with her eyes. A woman who groaned in the night and whimpered at dawn, and trusted me not out of love, but out of habit. And I never asked for more, not even when it felt like I was fading behind the curtains and into the wallpaper. I don't know what hurt more, her words or the silence that followed them. I stayed bent for a moment longer than I needed to, like I was bracing for something else. An apology, a laugh, even a grunt, but nothing came. So I stood, slowly. The bowl in my hand felt heavier than it should have. My fingers closed around it carefully, as if it might shatter, just from being held by someone like me. I placed it back on the counter and walked to the sink, letting the water run until it was hot enough to feel like something. I remember a time when hands like mine were considered sacred, when people used to say, "No one makes soup like you do," or "Your touch is healing." I held babies, combed hair, massaged aching shoulders. I mended torn hems and calmed trembling chests. My hands were strong. My hands were love. Now apparently, they're just hands. "You have hands, don't you?" The words echo, over and over in the quiet hours, as I fold laundry that isn't mine, as I pour tea no one drinks, as I wash dishes and hear laughter from the next room, laughter that never includes me. I don't think she meant it to be cruel. That's what makes it worse. Cruelty has weight, intent. What she gave me was something else, indifference. And I've learned after all these years that indifference is colder than cruelty. You can't argue with it. You can't cry your way through it. It just stares past you. There was a time when I would have laughed it off, made a joke lighten the mood, so the walls wouldn't feel so thick with discomfort. But that day I didn't say anything. I just turned off the water, wiped my hands, and walked out to the porch where the wind was at least honest. I sat down in the chair that creaks under my weight, though I'm not nearly as heavy as I once was. I sat there with my hands in my lap and let the silence press against my skin like something familiar. I used to believe that if I was kind enough, patient enough, generous enough, someone would notice. Someone would love me for it. But love, I've found, isn't always the reward for devotion. Sometimes it's just the echo that never comes. I've spent my life earning gold stars no one gave. My hands have wiped tears, opened jars, cooked feasts, held vigil beside hospital beds. But here in this house I helped build. They are nothing more than functional. You have hands, don't you? Yes, yes, I do. But what do you have? Maybe I was foolish. I thought being good would be enough. I thought being the kind of woman who stays, who serves, who listens, I thought that mattered. But now I see. Goodness doesn't always leave a mark. Sometimes it's invisible. Sometimes it's the thing that makes you easier to forget. So I sat with my bowl of silence. I let the wind lift the ends of my thinning hair, and I began to realize that something inside me had shifted, not loudly, not sharply, but like a leaf finally letting go of the branch. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, veined, still steady despite everything. I thought about all they had done, and how little anyone had seen. There was a time when my hands were never still, when they moved from dawn to dusk, with purpose and care kneading dough, buttoning little shirts, smoothing blankets, braiding hair. Every motion, no matter how small, held a kind of quiet love. I believed that love meant service, that to care was to give of yourself completely, with no thought of keeping anything back. I didn't question it. I didn't stop to wonder what I might be losing in the process. I was a wife, a mother, a daughter-in-law, and I wanted to be good at those things. That was all. I remember waking early before anyone else. The house still dark, the air holding the hush of sleep. I would light the stove, start the rice slice, fruit boil tea leaves. The way the morning light spilled into the kitchen used to make me feel like I had a place of purpose. I thought, they'll wake to warmth, because I was here. It made me proud, not in a loud way, just a small, tucked-away pride, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. But that kind of pride doesn't get remembered. It gets absorbed, like a rug that catches dirt but is never noticed until it's threadbare. When my husband's mother came to live with us, she was already frail, her ankles swollen, her back curved from age and grief. She never asked to be doted on, but I did it anyway. I prepared her meals the way she liked them. I warmed her socks in winter. I read to her when her eyes grew too tired to hold words. I cleaned her sheets when she could no longer control her body, and I did it gently without a word. I told myself this was what love looked like. Not fireworks, not roses, but daily acts of devotion performed quietly out of sight. 15 years. That's how long I cared for her. Longer than I raised my own children. Longer than some marriages even last. And in all that time, I never traveled. I never rested. I never said, "Can someone else take over for today?" Because I was afraid they'd say yes, and then I wouldn't know who I was anymore. I still remember the day she passed. It was a warm afternoon, the windows open, the scent of mangoes in the air. I held her hand until the end. She didn't say goodbye. She hadn't spoken in weeks. But her fingers curled slightly around mine, and I took that as enough. I sat with her long after the room had grown still. When the others came in, my husband, my son, even the little ones, they cried. They kissed her forehead. But I was the one who had witnessed her quiet unraveling day by day. I was the one who had already said goodbye 1,000 times. At the funeral, no one mentioned me, not in the speeches, not in the conversations afterward. They talked about how strong she was, how proud, how dignified, and I stood off to the side, wondering if anyone knew how many times I had caught her when she fell, how many nights I'd spent at her bedside. I suppose it didn't matter. My job had never been to be seen, only to be useful. Even now, all these years later, no one speaks of that chapter. They remember her. They remember the burden of loss. But they do not remember the woman who carried the weight of those final years so that they could go on living their lives. And perhaps I told myself that someday, when I grew old, that care would be returned, that the love I'd poured into others would come back like water, flowing home. I never expected luxury. I never imagined being pampered, but I thought at the very least there would be kindness, a gentleness in the way I was spoken to, a soft blanket, a fresh meal, a warm voice, not the coldness of someone who looks at you as though you are in the way, as though you've overstayed your welcome in a house you helped build. Sometimes I wonder if I taught them this, if my silence all those years made them believe I didn't need gratitude, if my endless giving made them think I didn't need care. Maybe I made it too easy. Maybe they thought I was tireless because I never let them see me tired. That's the risk of being too good at enduring. You train the world to ignore your pain. I think back to the way I once carried groceries in both arms, while pushing a stroller with my hip sweat pouring down my back, my heart pounding. And still I smiled. I thought I was showing strength. I didn't realize I was teaching everyone that I didn't need help. Now even a simple act of cruelty like tossing words over a dropped bowl is seen as justified. After all, I have hands, don't I? But those hands are not the same. They ache in the morning, stiff at the joints. They tremble when I hold a teacup too long. They no longer move with the grace they once had. And yet they still serve. They still fold towels and sweep floors and peel vegetables, out of habit, out of fear, out of love that has nowhere else to go. I suppose what breaks my heart isn't just her words, it's what they represent. A world that forgets, a family that has absorbed all of me and offered so little back. And I wonder how many other women like me are out there, bending to pick up dropped bowls, while someone nearby says, "You have hands, don't you?" 15 winters, 15 summers. That's how long I took care of my husband's mother. Seasons came and went, each one folding into the next like worn pages in a book that no one else had time to read but me. I remember how she used to sit by the window during those early years, her shoulders small under the weight of a shawl I knitted for her, the same shawl she once accused me of making too plain. But I kept wrapping it around her anyway, gently, like tucking in a child. There was no warmth between us. Not at first. Maybe not ever. But there was duty. And I believe duty was just another name for love. She wasn't unkind, not exactly. Just distant. Proud in the way older women sometimes are, women who have buried more than they've birthed. She had lost her husband long before I came into the family. And though she never said it, I think she resented needing help. She didn't want to be weak. She didn't want her son's wife washing her feet or helping her to the bathroom. She would flinch when I reached for her arm, as if my kindness were a reminder of how far she had fallen. But she still let me. She never thanked me, but she didn't refuse me either. That became our rhythm, a quiet agreement, a wordless dance. I bathed her, clothed her, fed her, when her hands could no longer grip a spoon. I combed her hair, slow and careful, parting it down the middle the way she liked. I bought her favorite crackers even when the market was far and my knees were aching. I sat through hours of silence, just so she wouldn't be alone. And when she whimpered at night, I was the one who came. Always me. I missed weddings, birthdays. I passed up job offers, vacations, even weekend trips, not because anyone told me to, but because I told myself, this is what a good woman does. And I so desperately wanted to be good. I told myself I was planting something deep in the soil, that someday the fruit of all this sacrifice would bloom in the form of respect, appreciation, perhaps even love. But that fruit never ripened. It just stayed under the surface, buried and forgotten. Her decline was slow. First, she stopped reading. Then she forgot names. Some days she thought I was a nurse. Some days she called me by her sister's name. But even when her memory betrayed her, her pride did not. One night, as I helped her into bed, she looked at me with more clarity than she had in weeks. She didn't say thank you. She said, "You're still here." 4 words. I don't think she meant them as gratitude, maybe more as a quiet marvel, but I clung to them like a blessing. When she finally passed, it was gentle. I was at her side. Her breathing slowed like waves pulling back from shore. Her eyes fluttered. Her fingers twitched in mine. And then stillness. I sat with her for hours. No one told me to. I just couldn't leave her alone in that moment. I brushed her hair one last time. I straightened her blanket. I closed the window so the breeze wouldn't disturb her. I wanted her to leave this world with dignity, even if she hadn't always given me that same gift. The funeral was simple. Her son, my husband, cried in a way I'd never seen before. Our children stood in black, awkward and unsure. Everyone spoke of her strength, her resilience, her sacrifices. I stood in the back. No one mentioned mine, and yet I didn't expect them to. I'd gotten used to being the one behind the curtain, pulling the strings, never stepping into the spotlight. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything returned to normal, except for me. Her presence had filled our house like a shadow, like a hush. Without her, there was space, and I didn't know what to do with it. I'd spent 15 years in service to someone who never asked for it, and when she was gone, I realized I no longer knew how to be just me. I wandered the house like a ghost of myself. I tried to rest, but rest felt like guilt. I tried to read, but the words didn't stay in my head. I'd lost the rhythm of my own life. They say caregiving is an act of love, but no one talks about how it hollows you, how it turns you into a vessel for someone else's needs, how when it's over, you're not sure what's left inside. My daughter-in-law came into our lives just a year later. She moved with energy, with noise. She took up space like a flag planted in the ground. I watched her part envy, part awe. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask if it was okay to speak her mind. She simply assumed her place. And maybe that's what made her look at me the way she does. Like I'm old wallpaper. Like I belong to a time that doesn't matter anymore. She never knew my mother-in-law. She never saw what I did. She sees me only as I am now, quiet, slow, soft-spoken. She doesn't know the woman I was. Or maybe she does, and she simply doesn't care. Either way, when she said what she said, "You have hands, don't you?" It didn't just sting because of the moment. It stung because it erased 15 years of quiet, back-breaking, soul-giving love. And that is a wound no apology could ever close. The kitchen was always my domain, not by declaration, but by habit. From the first moment I married into the family, I found myself in there, elbows deep in flour, wiping down counters, boiling water, stirring sauces, always making something warm, something comforting. I wasn't told to do it. No one demanded it. But everyone accepted it as natural, expected. A silent assignment. I carried it gladly in the early years. I wanted to be seen as capable as caring. I wanted to belong. And for a while, that kitchen became my language. I folded my love into dumplings. I poured apology into tea. I served forgiveness in bowls of hot soup. And still not once did anyone say, "Thank you for dinner." Not even a passing, "That was good, Mom." The food vanished from the plates, the sink filled with dishes, and I cleared them away as if it were magic, as if they simply disappeared into thin air. But it wasn't magic. It was my hands, my body, my time, every time. There's something hollow about unthanked labor. You keep thinking maybe tomorrow they'll notice, maybe next week, maybe when they grow older. But the silence just stretches, and eventually you stop hoping. You just keep doing. Because stopping would feel like asking, and I was taught never to ask. Once I had made a full-meal braised pork soup with lotus root, stir-fried greens, rice steamed just right. I'd been on my feet since sunrise. When I finally sat down, no one looked up. Not one person asked if I'd like help serving, or even how my day had gone. The television was on, their chopsticks clinked, and I just sat there, a ghost in my own home. I remember thinking, they think I exist for this, like the table or the light switch. I'm part of the scenery. I smiled anyway. I always smiled. The closest I ever got to appreciation was absence. The few times I was sick, or when I had to visit a cousin overnight, I'd return home to chaos, stale takeout, dirty pans, frustrated voices. "We missed your cooking," they'd say, more annoyed than grateful. It was never me they missed. It was the function I performed. Even holidays, Mother's Day, my birthday, those became work too. Hosting, planning, preparing everything so others could relax. My birthday cake, I bought it myself more than once. I cut it. I served it. I cleaned up after. My name was on the box, but the celebration never truly belonged to me. I began to see how invisible I'd become in my own service. The more I did, the less I existed. I had made things too easy, too smooth, like a river stone that's been shaped by years of water quietly worn away, made small so others can step over without stumbling. And then my daughter-in-law came into the picture, bright, bold, the kind who said what she thought without apology. At first I admired her confidence. She didn't ask before taking food from the pot, didn't offer to help wash up, didn't lower her voice when she disagreed with my son. I tried to see it as a generational difference, but in time it grew sharper. She began to speak to me like I was an obligation, a chore on her to-do list. Sometimes she would walk into the kitchen and sigh loudly like my presence there was an inconvenience. One evening, after I had finished cleaning up, she looked around the kitchen and said, "Why don't you use the dishwasher?" I told her I didn't trust machines to clean everything properly. She laughed and said, "Maybe that's why your hands look so old." I pretended not to hear, but I did. Of course I did. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the way she made me feel like a relic, like I was clinging to customs that no longer mattered. I began to notice the way she moved around me, as if I were slow, as if I were in the way, and slowly the others followed suit. My son, who once asked me for recipes, now only asked if there were leftovers. My grandchildren looked at their phones during dinner. No one asked me about my day. No one noticed if I didn't speak. There's an ache in being overlooked. It's not loud. It doesn't shout, but it builds, like dust on a windowsill gathering day by day until the light feels dimmer. And I began to dim with it. What I miss most isn't the praise, it's the small acknowledgments, the eye contact, the hand on my shoulder, the warm, "Let me help with that." But those moments stopped coming a long time ago. I suppose they never really came to begin with. Now I watch her bark instructions in the kitchen. "That goes here. Don't use that pan." She tells me where things belong, as if I haven't spent 30 years knowing every drawer, every burner, every rhythm of this home. It's like being evicted from my own skin. And yet I stay quiet. I smile. I step aside. But inside a small part of me wonders, when did I go from being the heart of this house to being its shadow? She came to visit for the first time on a rainy afternoon, my new daughter-in-law still glowing from the wedding, her makeup perfect, her nails painted a soft shade of pink that didn't chip even when she opened jars without hesitation. I remember I had spent the morning making soup, the kind that simmers slowly, that fills the air with ginger and scallions and memories. I wanted to welcome her with warmth, to make her feel cared for the way I had once longed to be welcomed by my own mother-in-law, but never was. She stepped into the house and looked around like she was already measuring the space, already rearranging furniture in her mind. I offered to take her coat. It was damp from the rain, but she shrugged me off, letting it drip on the floor. "I'm not a guest," she said with a little laugh. I bent down and picked it up anyway, gently shaking it out before hanging it to dry. I smiled through the sting. I had prepared everything. Cushions fluffed, tea already steeped, soup hot and waiting. She walked into the kitchen and said, "Smells old-fashioned in here." Not unkindly, but not kindly either. Just a passing comment. I ladled the soup into a bowl for her and handed it over with both hands, a gesture of respect I still believed in. She didn't notice. She was already looking at her phone. I watched her eat, her lips barely parting, her eyes fixed on the screen. She finished quickly without a word. I took her bowl to the sink, and she said, "You don't have to do that," but didn't move to help. And when she left later that evening, I realized I hadn't sat down once the whole time she was here. After that visit, she came more often. At first, I hoped it meant we were building something, a relationship, a new layer to this family I'd held together for decades. But it didn't take long to see that I was simply part of the scenery to her. I was the one who opened the door, who put the kettle on, who cleaned up after. She treated the house as if it were already hers, and me as if I were just the old woman who came with it. Once she looked at me while I was massaging my wrist. It had been aching badly that week, and she said, "Don't overdo it, you'll just slow everyone down." There was no malice in her voice. That was the part that hurt most. It was the same tone you'd use for a cracked chair or a car that takes too long to start. I wasn't a person in her eyes. I was an obstacle to be worked around. Still, I tried. I made her favorite dishes. I listened to her talk about her job, her friends, the furniture she wanted to buy. I asked questions, nodded politely, tried to offer advice only when asked. She rarely looked up, and when she did, it was with a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. One time she told me I was too polite, and I didn't know how to respond to that. But the moment that stayed with me was simple, almost laughable in its cruelty. She had just walked in complaining about traffic. I had just finished folding laundry, my back sore from the hour I'd spent bent over. As I passed her in the hallway, she said without looking, "Didn't you wear that shirt yesterday?" Just like that. A sentence so small it could be mistaken for nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a reminder that to her I wasn't a woman who had sacrificed, who had endured, who had loved in quiet ways. I was just someone who wore the same shirt twice. I told myself to be patient, that this was just a phase, that eventually she'd soften. She'd see me. She'd understand the things I've done for this family. But seasons passed and her tone never changed. If anything, it hardened. She became more confident in the way she moved around me. She took more space, filled, more silence, dismissed, more of my presence. And yet I continued to serve, out of habit, out of hope, out of a deep-seated fear that if I stopped, no one would pick it up, that the house would fall apart, that I would no longer be needed. But I was already becoming invisible. The more I gave, the less I was seen. It's a strange thing to feel so much love in your chest, and yet be treated like an afterthought, like a fixture, like an old teapot no one uses but won't throw away. I think what cuts deepest is the contrast. I remember when I was a new bride trembling under the cold gaze of my own mother-in-law. I promised myself I'd be different, that I would make space, offer warmth, share kindness. And I did. I truly did. But in return, I received a coldness I never expected. Not just from her, but now from the woman I welcomed into our home, with soup and open hands. I don't know what I expected, but I know I didn't deserve this. I didn't learn to be small all at once. It happened over years, decades even. Like water smoothing the edges of stone, I wore myself down for the sake of peace, of harmony, of being liked. I used to have a voice. I used to laugh, loudly cry, freely argue when I believed I was right. But over time, I began to hold those parts of myself back little by little until what remained was a version of me that was easier to live with for everyone but me. It started innocently, a quiet moment at the dinner table when I felt dismissed, but smiled anyway, a conversation where I disagreed but chose to nod because I didn't want to make things uncomfortable. I told myself that choosing silence was maturity, that holding in my opinions was wisdom, that being easygoing was a gift, and maybe sometimes it was, but mostly it was erasure. When I was young, I believed that speaking too much would push people away. I had seen women who were called difficult, too emotional, nagging. I didn't want to be one of them. I wanted to be kind, supportive, soft. I wanted to be the woman who made others feel calm when she entered the room. So I swallowed my hurt. I brushed aside disrespect. I put everyone else's needs ahead of my own until I forgot I even had needs. And they got used to that version of me, the one who never said no, the one who offered her plate to others before taking a bite, the one who cleaned up spills that weren't hers and smiled when no one helped. At first I thought they loved me for it. Now I wonder if they just liked the convenience of it. I began to notice how often I apologized for things that weren't my fault. If someone bumped into me, I said sorry. If I needed help opening a jar, I felt embarrassed. If I made a mistake, even a small one, I rushed to fix it before anyone could point it out. I was terrified of being seen as a burden. I worked so hard not to take up space that I started to forget how to exist fully in a room. And then came my daughter-in-law. She didn't shrink herself. She didn't apologize for taking up space. She spoke her mind without hesitation, asked for things directly, even corrected my son in front of others. I watched her with a mix of admiration and unease. I didn't know whether to be proud of her or afraid of her, because she represented everything I had taught myself not to be. One afternoon, she was rearranging the kitchen drawers. I gently mentioned where the ladles had always gone, just trying to be helpful. She didn't even turn around. "That's not how I do it," she said. And that was that. I stood there with my hand hovering over the drawer, feeling like a child who had been corrected. I laughed quietly to cover the sting and left the room before she could see the look on my face. Later that night, I found myself whispering apologies to no one. I had said nothing wrong. I had simply spoken. But that in itself felt like a crime now. It frightened me how deeply I had internalized the idea that my voice was unwelcome. I tried to remember the last time someone asked how I felt, what I wanted. I couldn't recall. I tried to remember the last time I interrupted someone, the last time I disagreed openly, the last time I told someone I needed a break. All I could remember was silence, mine. Even my body had begun to reflect it. I walked more slowly. I moved around people instead of through them. I hesitated before entering rooms, waited to be invited to speak, flinched slightly when someone raised their voice, not because they frightened me, but because I was afraid of being an inconvenience. I had molded myself into the shape of someone who fit around others, not someone who stood firm. Once during a family gathering, I tried to tell a story, something simple, a memory about my son when he was young. I had only gotten 2 sentences in before someone interrupted, laughing about something unrelated. The conversation shifted. No one came back to me. I stayed silent for the rest of the evening, smiling politely, nodding at jokes, refilling drinks. I don't think anyone noticed I hadn't finished my sentence. And still I kept trying to be the calm in the chaos, the one who never raised her voice, the one who offered love without conditions, who folded her opinions into the corners of the room and dusted around them. But inside, something was changing. I was beginning to feel the weight of all that I had not said, all the parts of myself I had buried under a smile. That day when she dropped the bowl and looked at me with that smirk, "You have hands, don't you?" Something cracked open. It wasn't just about that moment. It was the accumulation of years of dismissals, of being overlooked, of teaching the people around me that I didn't mind being last. It was the realization that I had become small, not because I was weak, but because I had believed that love meant disappearing. But I am still here. My voice may be quiet, but it exists. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let it out slowly, gently, but without apology. I wasn't supposed to hear it. They were in the kitchen, just a few steps from where I sat folding towels on the sofa. I had left the door slightly ajar, just enough for the afternoon breeze to slip through, and I suppose my presence slipped their minds entirely. My daughter-in-law was laughing loud and carefree, the way she always was when she thought no one was listening. She was telling a story, something about me, I realized by the way she curled her voice into a brittle mimicry. She softened. It made it slow with just the right touch of helplessness. And then with a chuckle she said, "She talks like she's afraid of the sound of her own voice." They laughed. Not just her. Him too. My son. I stopped folding the towel in my lap. My hand stilled the soft cotton creased between my fingers. The moment was so quiet I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, a soft thud against a chest that has known far too many moments like this. I sat there listening, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't move. It was like I had vanished from the room even though I was still inside it. That kind of pain isn't sharp. It doesn't slice. It seeps. It enters through the cracks of your skin and settles in your bones. I don't think I'll ever forget the way my son laughed. Not because it was particularly cruel, but because it was so ordinary, so easy, as if mocking me had become a kind of sport they didn't even notice they were playing. They changed the subject after that, went on talking about renovations, weekend plans, some restaurant they wanted to try, and I kept folding methodically the same towel over and over, just so I wouldn't have to stand up and see their faces. Later that evening, when the house was quiet again, I replayed the moment in my mind. I thought of all the times I had held my tongue, all the times I had waited for someone else to speak first. I thought about how I had made silence my shield, hoping that it would protect me from being misunderstood, from being labeled difficult or demanding. But now I saw that my silence had become their justification. They had taken it to mean I didn't feel, that I didn't mind. But I did mind. I minded when my suggestions were brushed off, when I was talked over, when I was told how to do something I had done for 30 years. I minded when my own son no longer looked me in the eyes when he spoke, as if I were a relic of his past, not part of his present. I minded when I became a shadow in the house I helped raise him in a ghost, with hands that still cooked his meals, but a heart he no longer thought to tend. I never thought I'd envy women who spoke without restraint, but I do. I envy the ones who say, "That's not okay," without trembling, who walk into a room and take up space without apology, who are not afraid to be disliked for the sake of being heard. I wonder what my life might have looked like if I had dared to speak more, to interrupt, more to say no when I meant no, and yes, only when I truly felt it. The mimicry, the joke, they were small things, but they chipped away at something I had held close for years, the image of myself as a dignified woman, a woman of grace, a woman who gave without resentment. And now I wasn't so sure. Was it grace or just fear? Was it dignity or just surrender? That night I didn't sleep well. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the plaster like constellations. I thought about the voice she imitated, my voice, the one I had softened over the years to avoid raising conflict, the one I had trained to stay small so others could feel large. I thought about the things I hadn't said when they criticized my cooking, when they forgot my birthday, when they used the word burden, just loudly enough for me to hear. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt emptied, like someone had opened me up and taken something sacred without asking. The next morning I moved slower, not because I was tired, but because something inside me had shifted. I made tea for myself only. I folded the laundry and left it in a neat stack without bringing it to their rooms. I sat on the porch a little longer, letting the sun touch my skin without urgency. And when she came into the kitchen that day, tossing her bag onto the counter, asking what's for lunch, I simply said, "I don't know," and walked out. I could feel her confusion behind me, maybe even irritation, but I didn't turn back. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I let the silence speak for itself. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't defiance. It was the smallest act of reclamation. The beginning of something new. It was a Sunday morning, the kind I used to love, slow and simple, when the sunlight moved gently across the kitchen floor, and the smell of breakfast filled the house like a warm hug. I had made pancakes, not because anyone asked, but because that's what I've always done. Sundays meant sweetness, softness, a table full of people and stories and syrup. I used to imagine that my grandchildren would one day remember these mornings as golden, the kind of memory that stays lodged in the heart. But this morning was different. I brought the plates out one by one, set the table just like always, forks to the left, napkins folded, jam in the small bowl they liked. I waited for them to come in. They did, but not all at once. They trickled in with distracted faces and heavy steps, phones in hand, AirPods in ears, conversations already going, none of them with me. I stood there beside the stove apron on hands still warm from the skillet. No one made eye contact. No one said, "Good morning." No one noticed I hadn't eaten yet. They sat. They served themselves. My daughter-in-law placed her phone face down beside her plate and began cutting into the pancakes. She didn't ask if I wanted to sit. She didn't even glance in my direction. My son came in last. He looked around then at the one empty chair left at the table and said, "Is someone else joining us?" And that's when I realized. They hadn't set a place for me. Not on purpose, not with malice, but out of something colder, forgetfulness. I had become so much a part of the background that they no longer thought to include me in the very rituals I created. I stood there in my own kitchen looking at the table I had prepared and felt like a guest in a house I built with my hands. There was a pause just long enough for the silence to sting. I said softly, "No, no one else is coming." My daughter-in-law looked up, briefly shrugged, and went back to her plate. That was it. No apology, no invitation, no shifting over to make space. The meal carried on without me. So I turned. I took the extra pancake from the griddle, placed it on a small saucer, and went to the back porch. I sat there alone, the plate on my lap, the syrup soaking slowly into the bread. The birds were chirping. The breeze tugged at the hem of my dress. For a moment it felt almost peaceful, until I realized I was outside, because there was no space for me inside. That chair, the one they forgot to set, it wasn't about a chair. It was about being seen, about being remembered, about mattering. After everything I'd done, I had become invisible. The house still smelled like me, but no one noticed I wasn't sitting at the table. I thought about all the meals I had made, hundreds, maybe thousands, about how I used to whisper blessings over each pot stirring in hope healing patience, about how I used to imagine that food could fix anything, that it could make people kinder, that it could make me indispensable. But food doesn't anchor love the way I thought it would. You can feed someone every day of their life, and they can still forget to set you a place. I sat with that thought for a long time. And then something strange happened. I began to feel lighter, as though a weight I didn't know I was carrying had begun to lift. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad, not in the way I used to be. I just saw it clearly, the truth. I had made myself smaller so they could feel full. I had erased my own needs so they wouldn't feel burdened, and now they no longer saw me at all. That moment on the porch became a kind of mirror, not the kind that shows you your face, but the kind that reflects your place in the world. And mine, I realized, was outside the frame. Not because I had been pushed there, but because I had stepped out willingly again and again until they stopped expecting me to be in the picture at all. The pancakes were cold by the time I finished. The syrup had pooled into the corners of the plate, too sweet to swallow in a single bite. I sat quietly watching the curtain in the kitchen window flutter. I could see their silhouettes inside laughing about something. Their joy didn't include me, and that was the most painful truth of all, that joy could exist without me, that my absence didn't create an echo. I stood slowly, gathered my plate, and walked inside. I didn't speak. I didn't scold. I didn't cry. I just cleaned up the table after they'd gone, wiping crumbs into my palm, setting the plates in the sink. I cleared a place for myself, not at the table, but in my own mind, a space where I mattered even if no one else remembered to leave a chair. It was after one of those long, noisy birthday parties, the kind that start with cake and end in half-empty bottles and forgotten plates, that I noticed the stain on my apron. A dark, sticky streak of frosting smeared across the side, the kind that only happens when you clean up in a hurry, carrying too many things at once, because no one offers to help. I stood at the sink, scrubbing a pan that wasn't mine, listening to laughter from the living room. I wasn't part of the conversation. I wasn't missed. I was where they expected me to be, quietly cleaning up after their joy. The stain shouldn't have meant anything, just chocolate, or maybe wine, but I couldn't stop staring at it, because it wasn't just a smear of icing. It was the mark of everything I had done that no one ever saw. It was the years of wiping up spills I didn't make, of folding clothes I didn't wear, of staying late to sweep floors after everyone else had gone to bed. My life was stitched into that apron. And in that moment, it looked so tired, so unthanked, so used. I looked down at my hands, red from hot water, hands that had stirred pots, buttoned tiny shirts, bandaged knees, folded paper cranes for bored children, hands that had once been soft and eager, now knuckles, swollen nails, cracked skin, thin and flecked with age, still working, still serving, still invisible. From the other room, I heard my granddaughter's voice, high sweet, still untouched by hardness. "Why does Grandma always look sad?" she asked, loud enough to carry. My chest stilled. I didn't move. I waited for someone to answer her. I waited to hear what they would say. There was a beat of silence, and then my daughter-in-law said, light as air, "She just worries too much. That's how old people are." That was it. No correction, no tenderness, no pause to consider that maybe I had reason to look sad, that maybe I wasn't born with sorrow in my bones, but had slowly absorbed it drop by drop over a lifetime of being quietly set aside. I turned off the tap. The water gurgled down the drain, carrying soap bubbles and flecks of food and a bit of my breath. I stood there for a long time, holding the pan in one hand, the stained apron clinging to my hip. I thought about how many parties I had planned, how many birthdays I had made special, how many candles I had lit for others, and still I had become the sad woman in the background, a fixture, a shadow, not a person with a story with aches and joys and weariness, but an archetype, the worried old woman who clings to her apron and doesn't know how to sit down. They didn't see the full picture. They saw a face weathered by time, not realizing it was also weathered by sacrifice. They saw hands that trembled, not knowing those same hands had once carried them through storms they never even noticed. They saw eyes that looked tired, but not the nights behind them, nights spent keeping fevered foreheads, cool whispering prayers in the dark sewing buttons and dreams in equal measure. And when a child asks why someone looks sad, what they're really asking is, why don't we see her joy? And the answer, though, they may never say it aloud, is this: because we never gave her room for it. I used to think if I just kept going, kept cooking, kept folding, kept smiling, they would see. They would remember. They would understand. But I'm starting to see that understanding doesn't come just from effort. It comes from being asked, being listened to, being welcomed into the space of importance. And no one had asked me how I felt in a very long time. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights were dim, I took off the apron and looked at it in my hands. I thought about washing it again, about scrubbing out the stain. But something in me stopped. Maybe it didn't need to be cleaned. Maybe it needed to be left as it was a testament to everything I had done that no one had thanked me for. I folded it gently and placed it in the back of the drawer. Then I sat at the table alone, poured myself a cup of tea, and let the silence surround me, not as punishment, but as something sacred, something mine. I closed my eyes and thought about my granddaughter's voice, her question so simple and so true, and I whispered into the empty room, "I'm not sad, little one. I'm just tired of being unseen." I caught my reflection by accident. It was late afternoon. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counter again and was walking past the sliding glass door when I saw her. That woman in the glass. Hair pinned back, apron still tied, shoulders slightly hunched. She was smiling, but the smile didn't look like it came from her heart. It looked like it came from habit, a reflex, like someone who had smiled through enough dismissals to forget what joy really felt like. I stopped and stared. There was something unfamiliar about her, something hollow in the way she held herself. I tilted my head. So did she. I raised a hand to smooth a loose hair. She followed, and suddenly I felt a strange ache deep in my chest, like I was looking at someone I used to know, a woman I'd left behind in the rush of caring for others, in the blur of decades spent serving, cleaning, tending, accommodating. I used to laugh more. I remember that now. I used to sing while I cooked. I used to wear earrings even if I was just staying home. When did I stop doing those things? When did I become this quiet, invisible woman who waits in doorways and apologizes with her eyes? The truth is, I gave so much of myself that there wasn't much left over. And in giving it all, I convinced everyone, including myself, that I didn't need anything in return. Not appreciation, not recognition, not even a chair at the table. But that reflection showed me something different. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had poured too much love into people who only knew how to receive, not return. She looked like someone who had waited too long for something that never came, an acknowledgement, a thank you, a gentle hand on the shoulder. And now, she didn't even look surprised that it never arrived. It's a terrible thing to forget your own face. I stepped closer to the glass, wanting to find traces of the woman I once was, the young bride who blushed at compliments, The mother who danced in the living room with a toddler on her hip. The woman who used to feel beautiful not because anyone told her so, but because she believed it herself. I wanted to find her again, even just a glimpse. But the smile on that woman's face wasn't real. It was the smile you wear when you've been told for too long that being quiet is noble. That selflessness is the same as love. That to be needed is the same as being valued. It's not. To be needed is about utility. To be valued is about being seen. And I had been needed for decades, but I hadn't been truly seen in years. I took a step back, the image blurring slightly in the glass. My hands were wrinkled. Yes. My hair thinner. My back not as straight as it once was. But none of that made me lesser. What made me lesser was forgetting that I had the right to more than just survival, that I had the right to be cherished. And I thought if my granddaughter saw me like this, would she recognize the strength behind the smile? Would she know that behind every quiet nod and gentle step was a woman who once held this family together with nothing but grit and grace? Or would she only remember that I always looked a little sad? It's easy to disappear when you train yourself to be small. I see that now. I see how I laughed less each year, how I ate the burnt piece of meat so others could have the best, how I spoke last in conversations, if at all. I see how I stopped buying clothes for myself, how I skipped doctor appointments, how I waited to eat until everyone else was full. I told myself it was kindness, but deep down I was afraid that if I asked for anything I'd be seen as selfish, and worse, unlovable. That day, standing in front of the glass door, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took off the apron. Just slipped it over my head and let it rest on the back of the chair. It felt symbolic even though no one else was there to witness it. I smoothed down my dress, lifted my chin, and tried to smile, not the practiced kind, but one that came from within. It didn't quite reach my eyes, but it was a start. I turned from the glass and walked toward the living room. No one looked up. My daughter-in-law was talking on the phone. My son was scrolling. I stood there for a moment, waiting to be acknowledged. I wasn't. So I walked to my room and sat at my small vanity. I opened the drawer and found an old lipstick, dusty, nearly dried, but still a little pink. I put it on, and for the first time in years I recognized the woman in the mirror. Not fully, not yet, but she was there, hiding beneath the years, waiting to be invited back. I began spending more time on the porch, not out of loneliness, but out of something quieter, harder to name. Perhaps it was preservation. Perhaps it was the last stretch of myself reaching for a space where I could still breathe, without being evaluated, dismissed, or directed. There was something sacred about sitting in a worn wicker chair with a cup of tea slowly going cold in my hands, watching the sky turn from honey to ash as the day unraveled itself gently. Out there, the silence felt different. Inside the house, it was heavy, an absence filled with unmet glances and unspoken grief. But on the porch, the silence became a kind of balm. The leaves rustled with stories older than me. The birds chirped, without needing anyone to respond. And the breeze, soft, steady, unbothered, did not care whether I had washed the dishes or forgotten to dust the windowsills. Most days, no one asked where I had gone. They didn't notice when I stopped eating dinner with them. I began preparing my own smaller meals earlier in the afternoon. Something simple, congee with pickled vegetables or steamed sweet potatoes with sesame salt. I left the larger meals to them. They didn't seem to mind. Maybe they even preferred it that way. I took my plate outside, sat alone, and watched the clouds change shapes. One evening I heard laughter from the kitchen, loud and sudden, the kind that used to come from my lips. It startled me. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed like that. Not a polite chuckle, not a humored sigh, but a deep, full laugh that starts in the belly and spills out without permission. I missed her, that woman I once was, the one who giggled with friends over tea, who hummed while folding laundry, who caught herself smiling at nothing because the day simply felt good. Where had she gone? And could she ever return? As I sat with my tea, the warmth of the cup fading, I noticed how my hands trembled just slightly. It wasn't new. It had been happening more frequently. Reaching for the spoon in the sugar bowl, I saw it a small, visible shake. I held my wrist to steady it instinctively, covering the evidence. But later that night, as I reached for a plate in the cupboard, my daughter-in-law saw it too. "Oh, careful," she said with a laugh, watching me fumble slightly. "You're not going to drop it, are you?" Her voice wasn't cruel. Not exactly. But there was something in it, something sharp, dressed in humor. I set the plate down slowly, said nothing. She didn't look at me after, just continued chopping vegetables, quick and efficient. That's how they see me now. Fragile, replaceable, slowing down. But they don't see the steadiness beneath the tremble. They don't see the years that shaped this body, the storms it survived. They see the shake, not the strength, the slowness, not the stamina. And I realize now that no matter how much I've given, no matter how many rooms I've cleaned, how many bowls I've filled, how many nights I stayed up, tending to someone else's need, this family has begun to treat me like a piece of antique furniture. Sentimental, maybe, but unnecessary. They don't ask for my stories. They don't ask what I think. They only ask if I've taken my medicine. The coldness is not in what they say. It's in what they don't. They don't ask me where I go in the afternoons. They don't ask why I no longer join their meals. They don't ask how I'm feeling or if I've been sleeping well. They don't ask what I miss or what I dream of. They just let me drift further out onto that porch, into that silence, until I'm more memory than mother, more function than person. But in that silence, something else is growing. Something slow, something deep. I'm beginning to remember myself. And in that remembering, I'm discovering that I no longer wish to beg for space. I no longer wish to wait for someone to offer me kindness, like a crumb off their plate. I am not a forgotten coat draped over the back of a chair. I am not a pair of trembling hands meant only for washing and serving and smoothing out everyone else's life. I am a woman who has carried generations, who has bled and broken and built without applause. I have loved fiercely. I have endured quietly. I have earned my place at any table I choose to sit at. And if they do not see that, then maybe it's time I stop setting their table altogether. When I sat down to take stock of what I had given, it wasn't bitterness that filled me, it was disbelief, a quiet, almost stunned realization that I had poured an entire lifetime into this family, and in return I had received, what? A few thank yous, here and there. A glance, a nod, a generic birthday card with my name misspelled once. But no one had ever looked me in the eye and said, "You mattered to me. You made this house a home." I began writing things down, not out of anger, but because I needed proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that I hadn't made myself up. In the back of an old recipe book, I listed them, the nights I stayed up with a sick child, the months I worked part-time to help with the mortgage, the years I cared for my mother-in-law, while my body ached from fatigue, and no one asked if I was okay. I wrote down every sacrifice, every small thing no one remembered. I wrote down the time I walked 3 miles in the rain to buy my daughter-in-law a birthday gift she never used. The time I missed my best friend's funeral because someone needed help assembling furniture. The time I spent 3 hours hemming a dress for a granddaughter who rolled her eyes and said, "It looks kind of old-fashioned." And I wrote it all without resentment, just fact. The pages began to fill. When I reached the bottom of the last page, I stared at the final line I'd written. I gave them everything. And underneath it I whispered aloud, "And I have nothing left." It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a wail, it was an inventory, a gentle summation of a life lived in the margins. And for the first time I saw it all clearly. I hadn't been generous, I had been erased. Bit by bit, year by year, I had traded my voice for peace, my energy for order, my dreams for their comfort. No one had asked me to, but no one stopped me either. There is something about being taken for granted that doesn't show up in photos. You can't see it in the family portraits hanging in the hallway. I'm in them, of course, always on the edge, one hand on a child's shoulder, smiling gently. But you can't see the sleepless nights behind that smile, the meals cooked before dawn, the tears wiped away in bathroom mirrors. You can't see the cost of the quiet. I thought back to the time I had my first health scare. I had fainted while sweeping the porch. When I came to, I was on the floor, heart pounding like a warning bell. I told my son about it later. He furrowed his brow and said, "Are you drinking enough water?" That was it. That was all. No follow-up, no concern, no visit. I remember thinking, is this what I've built? I had believed love was about service, that being useful was the same as being loved. But now I see love that only flows one way is not love. It is depletion. And I am depleted. Even my body knows it, the swelling in my joints, the weight in my chest when I breathe too deep, the dizziness that comes and goes like a cruel little game. My body is tired of being last, my soul even more so. I used to think that asking for anything help time rest was weakness. I thought strength was silence, endurance. But I was wrong. True strength is knowing when to stop giving to people who only know how to take. True strength is saying, enough, not with fury, but with finality. That night I made dinner, one plate, just for me. I sautéed greens with garlic the way I like them. I used the nice bowl, the one I always saved for guests. I lit a candle, not for ambiance, for me. Because even if no one saw me that night, I did, and I was done shrinking. The house buzzed around me as usual, TV in the background, laughter behind closed doors. But I didn't rush to join. I didn't offer to help. I didn't fold laundry while my knees ached. I ate slowly. I listened to the quiet. And when I was done, I washed my dish with care, dried it, and placed it back on the shelf. No one asked what I'd eaten. No one noticed I hadn't joined them. But for once I didn't feel invisible. I felt whole. That morning I dropped the cup. It slipped from my hand as I reached for the sugar bowl. A small, delicate teacup, one of the blue porcelain ones my husband gave me decades ago, back when love was new. And the house felt like a place we built together, not one I maintained alone. It shattered instantly. Pieces scattered across the floor like tiny white teeth. I bent to pick them up slowly, carefully. My knees popped as I knelt and my hand trembled ever so slightly. I held one jagged piece between my fingers, its sharp edge catching the light, and I just sat there for a moment, knees on the cold tile, breathing. Not crying, not sighing, just still. That's when she walked in. My daughter-in-law. She saw me on the floor, surrounded by the broken pieces, and instead of asking if I was okay, she laughed softly, almost like a reflex. "You're so dramatic," she said. "It's just a cup." Then, not even bothering to step around me, she turned and went to the fridge. I stayed there on the floor, hands full of fragments, her words echoing in my head. so dramatic, as if age were a performance, as if pain were a play I had chosen to star in. I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself. I simply placed the pieces on a napkin and slowly rose my joints, resisting like old hinges. I put the napkin in the trash and wiped the floor clean. I poured myself another cup of tea in a mismatched mug and took it outside. But as I sat on the porch with my tea, I thought, why didn't I say anything? Why did I let her speak to me like that? Why do I still swallow these small indignities like pills I've grown too used to taking? There was a time when I would have never allowed it, when I would have stood up, looked her in the eye, and said, that cup was a gift, and I matter. But over the years, I stopped standing up, not physically, emotionally, spiritually. Every time someone ignored me, corrected me, brushed past me, I bent a little further, until eventually I forgot how to rise. But something about that moment stayed with me, not the broken cup, not even her words, but the fact that I didn't flinch. I didn't scramble. I didn't apologize. I was tired of apologizing for breaking. Later that day, I walked into the living room where she sat scrolling on her phone. I stood behind her for a moment, waiting. She didn't look up, so I cleared my throat gently and said, "You hurt my feelings today." She blinked, surprised. "What?" I repeated it. "You hurt my feelings. When you called me dramatic. When you walked past me on the floor and didn't ask if I was all right." She shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said softly, "and that's what hurts." She didn't respond, just stared at the screen as if it held a better version of the conversation she was in. I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't need one. What I needed was to speak, to reclaim something I had buried for so long, the right to name my own pain, to no longer be the old woman who cleans quietly, who smiles through disrespect, who disappears without anyone noticing she's gone. That night I wrote in my notebook again, a new page, this one different from the rest. Today I stood up. Not against a crowd, not with a speech, but with a sentence, a truth spoken aloud. It felt strange at first, like stretching after years of being folded in half, but also necessary, like air after being underwater. I had thought for so long that to be respected, I had to be agreeable, that to be loved, I had to be small. But now I see that the people who truly care about you don't ask you to shrink. They don't ask you to sweep your sadness under the rug so the room stays pretty. They ask you what's wrong. They set down their phones. They sit beside you on the kitchen floor. She didn't do that, and I've stopped hoping that she will. But I did something important. I spoke, and whether she heard me or not, I heard me, and I will not forget the sound of my own voice again. The next morning, I took the broken pieces of the cup out of the trash. I washed them gently, dried them, and placed them in a small wooden box I kept in the back of my closet, not because I needed to fix it, but because I needed to remember what was broken and how I survived it. That day marked a quiet shift, not an earthquake, not a storm, just a stillness inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Like a door gently closing, not in anger, but in completion. I didn't announce it. I didn't change overnight. But something in me began to stir. Not rage, not bitterness, just the calm knowledge that I would not keep bending. I stopped doing the little things first. I didn't refill the sugar jar when it was empty. I didn't fold the blanket left crumpled on the sofa. I didn't leap to my feet the moment someone said we're out of clean towels. No one noticed at first. That was the hardest part. I had become so efficient in my invisibility that even my absence registered as nothing. The sugar stayed empty for days. The blanket remained untouched, and someone eventually found a towel for themselves without thanking anyone. But I noticed how the house didn't fall apart, how no one starved or cried or crumbled because I hadn't jumped up to smooth every crease. I noticed how the floor stayed dusty longer, how no one picked up the slack, and how slowly I started breathing easier anyway. For the first time in a long while, I made plans, small ones, quiet ones. I went to the library just to walk between the shelves and smell the pages. I bought myself a small bar of expensive soap and used it just for me. I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, not for any reason other than to hear someone say my name with love. I had forgotten how healing it was to be remembered. One afternoon, I sat outside sketching. Nothing serious, just shapes, lines, small memories. The way the trees bent with the wind, the way the garden used to look before it was paved over. I sketched my mother's hands from memory, my husband's crooked smile, a cup of tea left half-finished on the porch railing. My granddaughter wandered outside and looked over my shoulder. "You draw?" she asked, surprised. I smiled. I used to, a long time ago. "Why'd you stop?" I paused before answering. I don't think I ever gave myself permission to start again. She didn't understand the weight of that. She just nodded and skipped back inside. But the question stayed with me. Why did I stop? Why did I stop drawing, singing, laughing, dreaming? Because I was too busy patching everyone else's dreams together. Because I thought motherhood and later elderhood meant martyrdom. Because I believed that love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant silence. But I know better now. That evening I sat at the dinner table and served myself first. It was a small act, but it felt like standing on my own 2 feet for the first time after a long illness. My daughter-in-law watched but said nothing. My son glanced up, startled, then looked back down. They were surprised, I think. Surprised that I was not waiting. Surprised that I was not tending. Surprised to see me, really see me. I ate slowly. I didn't offer seconds. I didn't leap up when someone spilled water. I let them figure it out. And then I left the table while they were still eating. I walked out to the porch, cradled my warm cup, and watched the sunset on my terms. It wasn't rebellion. It was reclamation. I wasn't trying to punish them. I wasn't trying to make a point. I was simply choosing for once to be mine. Later that night, I wrote in my notebook again. I am not disappearing. I am stepping into the space I was told didn't belong to me. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe they'll adapt. Maybe they won't. Maybe I'll always be the quiet figure at the edge of the photo. But now I understand that I don't need their permission to live fully. I don't need to wait for someone to set a place for me to know I deserve one. Because I do. Because I have carried this family through years of storms without asking for shelter. Because I have stitched love into every corner of this house. Because I am not done yet. I am just beginning to return to myself. It was quiet when I began to pack. Not loud or dramatic. No slamming drawers, no creaking of boxes. Just the gentle sound of folded fabric, the rustle of old paper, the soft closing of a lid. I wasn't running away. I wasn't storming out. I was simply choosing something different, choosing me. The decision didn't come all at once. It came in layers, in small humiliations, in too many dinners where no one asked me how my day had been, in passing comments that stung but weren't worth arguing over, in years of being useful but not treasured, needed, but not loved. I had mentioned once long ago that I'd always dreamed of returning to the small seaside town where I grew up. I could still smell the salt in the air, still remember the rhythm of waves tapping against the dock. No one listened. No one asked about that place again. It was just something I had said in a quiet voice, and it had dissolved into the background like so many parts of me. But I remembered. And so on a Tuesday morning, I pulled down my old suitcase, the same one I had used when I moved into this house as a new bride. The zipper still worked, though, stiff from time. I filled it slowly with clothes, with books I had hidden away, with the scarf my mother had knit before she passed. I didn't take much, just what belonged to me, just what I could carry without regret. I didn't announce it. There was no letter, no speech. They had never asked what I needed, so I saw no reason to explain what I had finally found the courage to claim. But I left the house a little different that morning. I left the apron neatly folded on the kitchen table. I left the dishes unwashed in the sink. I left the towels unfolded in the basket, a quiet symbol of everything I'd done without being asked. I left the sugar jar empty, and I left the mirror uncovered so if they ever chose to look, they might see the outline of the woman who once filled every corner of that house with care. I walked down the front steps with my suitcase in hand and didn't look back. The garden was overgrown. The porch creaked. The door closed gently behind me. No one followed. At the train station, I sat with my ticket in my lap. The platform was nearly empty. A soft breeze tugged at my coat, and I closed my eyes. For a moment, I wasn't anyone's mother-in-law. I wasn't the woman who cooked, or cleaned, or listened, or waited. I was just a woman, with hands that still worked, with breath in her lungs, with a future, however small, still unwritten. When the train arrived, I stepped on board carrying nothing but my name and the quiet weight of my own worth. No destination spoken aloud, just forward. And as the landscape blurred past the window fields, fences, quiet roads, I whispered a sentence I hadn't let myself believe until that very moment. I don't have to stay where I am unseen. There's a certain peace that comes not from being heard by others, but from finally listening to yourself. I spent years believing that to be loved meant to serve, to sacrifice, to surrender the deepest parts of myself in exchange for a place in someone else's life. I was wrong. Love doesn't ask us to vanish. Kindness isn't the same as silence. And growing old doesn't mean growing invisible. I carried them all, every burden, every birthday, every spilled cup, and unspoken apology. I carried them in my bones, in my hands, in the quiet spaces of my soul. I gave them a home even when I no longer felt at home myself, and for a while that was enough. But now I want something softer, something still. A quiet morning where I pour my tea and no one interrupts. A room where my name is not a request, but a remembrance. A life where I am allowed to want things again. Even small ones, a breeze, a good book, a chair that rocks on a porch, that faces the sea. I didn't leave to punish them. I left to remember me. Because I am not only what I've given, I am what I've saved. What I've kept hidden under aprons and chores and lowered eyes. I am what still whispers inside, even after all these years. You deserve more. They forgot me, but I never forgot myself. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace.